On the 5th day of infant Christmas, an infant gave to me a rebirthed episode from 2015 called Away in a Manger.
The first Noel, the angel did say, was to certain poor shepherds in fields as they lay.
Wrong again. How can anyone believe this shit?
John Amos says no.
This is Infants on Thrones. Philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Smackdown.
So the idea of this podcast is that last year we did one that was ended up being called the Christmas Jesus, but
the historical Jesus.
Was
right?
It called?
Christmas.
I thought it's called the Christmas Jesus, but the topic of it was the historical Jesus in theory, and then we didn't really stand on that topic very long even. And so as we have had a lot of listeners who have kind of written in on the comments and have said, "Hey, I would like to hear more about this biblical stuff because we do." Mormon specific stuff, but we don't often spend a bunch of time on the Bible stuff, and so since it's Christmas, it seems like a completely reasonable time to just focus in more like a laser on the Christmas stories itself instead of the more broader ranging dialogue that we had on the last podcast that was named.
And by Christmas story, you don't mean the you'll shoot your eye out leg lamp Christmas story. This is a different one.
We're talking about like
smacking down baby Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh man, I called in for the wrong podcast.
Yeah, you clearly are calling in on your phone.
Yeah, I am on my phone.
It was like Snyder tradition because we had 7 kids. We had enough for a cast of characters, and every Christmas Eve night. We would do Luke 2. We'd reenact Luke 2. And I was at the right age to be Joseph for a good, 8 years. And I do remember feeling like I had...
Blue-balled?
I had grown up when I graduated from being Joseph to being the ass that my little sister Mary rode on into Jerusalem.
Wow.
Oh, that's
so
cute.
Those are my 2 parts. I was Joseph for like ever.
I hated. I mean, so we did one of those pageants in the Hamer family too every year. Although we did the readings like where we would read a little bit of Luke and then we'd read Matthew and then we'd go back to Luke or something like that. But what I hated the role of Joseph because I just felt that he didn't do anything. And so when I was as a youngest kid, I was a little drummer boy.
Oh, nice.
and then after a while, I just became one of the wise men. So anyway.
One of the like touching stories that I remember from seminary, and yes, all of my stories are from seminary, was how like the teacher was teaching us how Mary riding the donkey to Bethlehem was a foreshadowing of the way that Jesus would ride a donkey on his triumphal return to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the week before his arrest and execution, and just how like meaningful and symbolic that was. And the problem with that is, what's the problem with that? There's no donkey. There's no donkey in the scriptures.
Oh.
There's no donkey anywhere in the New Testament stories. It's Mary was, the donkey probably arose. It's like a popular depiction because it's like a way to get this poor pregnant lady for 80 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem.
It was just a way to give Randy a role.
So
because I had outgrown the Joseph.
The donkey is entirely a Randy vehicle.
The donkey is as apocryphal as you were playing the little drummer boy. There's no donkey.
So it's actually the opposite of what your teacher had told you, which is to say, it was the fact that Jesus rode a donkey into Jerusalem is why that's probably been added to the story apocryphally.
But that's so cute that Mormons would draw like pseudo profundity from something that doesn't exist to something that does.
Yes.
Another data point for the testimony
of the New Testament.
Yeah. This is totally off topic, so maybe you want to edit this out eventually. But do you know those stories where it's like the origin of the Christmas tree is the the needles that point up to the sky? Yeah. So I actually wrote one of those, and it is one of the worst things ever. Like in my height of believing days, and thinking this is something that my kids will have as their Christmas tradition. It was like I went to this cabin and he saw the ghost of his grandfather, and everything is teach the children the true meaning. Oh, I pulled it out a couple of years ago and just barfed. I toyed with like trying to dig it up and maybe doing something with it. For this, but I'll probably spare everyone.
I was watching this afternoon. I was rewatching Santa Claus is Coming to Town, the 1970 Rankin Bass Christmas special. Yeah. Or I don't know if it's claymation, but anyway, they have the little dolls that they stop motion photography. Oh yeah. And that one is entirely about this making myths about all the different things of Santa Claus. And so the whole idea of it is they're all these things we know about Santa Claus, where did they all come from? And then they make just insanely stupid stories to try to explain, why did Santa put toys into stockings? It's because the Burgermeister Burger of this town, because
that's history.
Made it out. It made toys outlawed, and so the kids, all they could do is they had to wash their stockings and they put them up over the fire, and so then Santa had to come in at the nighttime and put them in the stockings or something like that because of the law that prevented kids from having toys, or whatever. And so, and it really gets it starts to really break down when they. I don't know, when they explain the rain line. This kind of thing,
But it makes you see where all this is coming from. We still have that tendency to let's add some myth to this. Yep. Today,
yeah, exactly. So where do these stories come from? These myths that we tell, or something like that, and then we have to explain them, like Glenn.
Yes, I asked my family today. Well, I asked my husband. So name me 2 stories about George Washington. He's like, I don't know, the cherry tree and wooden teeth.
Tree.
And both of those are myths. We have season passes every year to Mount Vernon, and the cherry tree appears nowhere. That story doesn't come up until after George Washington's death, and it's invented by Mason Locke Weems, who writes this biography of him, but doesn't even put it in the first edition of the biography. He puts it in the 5th edition of the biography in 1806. It's the cherry tree is total fiction, and George Washington never wore wooden teeth. They were made of ivory, gold, and lead. I mean, much worse than wood. But those are the things that we know about him, right?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that
we're still doing it.
Wooden dentures are not a myth. They actually existed. We had this antique wooden set of dentures on display at our dental school at USC.
Oh, I don't mean that wooden dentures.
No. I just wanted to make. I just was clarifying.
Just in defense of wooden dentures.
Yeah. I'm just saying wooden teeth aren't a fake thing, but Washington did not have wooden teeth.
Right.
That's right. All right. What were you talking about?
The mother of all invented Christmas stories. The ones that have been canonized.
Right. Okay, before we do this, I just want to ask, Glenn, do you put out a nativity scene?
Me personally, I do with Star Wars action figures, but Krista has a couple that are traditional to her family, and so we've got 2 different nativities out on display.
So you've got like a Princess Leia with a...
No, it's it's an R2-D2 holding like a present, and then a Darth Vader, and then I forget what. And then I think I've used Simpson figures before, and then I bought several years ago an Angel Moroni Christmas tree ornament, for the top of the tree.
Yeah.
And I usually put that in the background for the shepherds to give it some authenticity. Because since that actually happened, whereas the Star Wars characters did not,
Don't want to forget about Moroni.
Right.
Pre-existent Moroni, actually, at the time. Because he was a pre-existent angel.
We all were. All of us were there.
Right.
Yeah, but Moroni was...
Heather was specifically one of those angels for the shepherds.
I was?
Right. That's what I've given to understand based on your singing talent.
Yay. I was there. For soprano.
John was singing to the shepherds, "You're wasting your time." That one, and he was pointing up to the star that wasn't in the sky, the one point of
navigation.
Yeah.
Actually, the first time I ever thought, it never even occurred to me how silly it is, the idea that a star can appear over like this manger. Like, have you ever looked in the sky? What's under that star?
Yeah, what are you directly under the star?
Yeah.
But, it's not actually what it even says. That's why we were going to have to go to
Oh, my God, I did it. I fell into the trap.
Well, and the same thing. It's like Glenn is like talking about the angels singing to the shepherds. And again, they're talking about, and then you just say, and they're pointing to a star. There's no star in the shepherd story. So it's
stories.
Totally different stories.
So I guess we should.
Yeah, I guess you're going to tell me that you weren't there either, John. Since we're splitting hairs.
I was there.
Okay. All right.
Were you there?
Enthusiastic singing angel, not great singing angel.
Well, you got to do it. You got to do it in Australian accent. Were you there? Were you there?
Yeah.
That was the debate with Bill Nye, the science guy.
Yes.
Unless you were there, you can't argue against something. Anyway,
let's start.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Christmas stories from the Bible, and so what we have, in the Bible when we're talking about the life of Jesus, we have the 4 canonical Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, of which Mark is the oldest one of these, and then Matthew and Luke, and then John is the later one. And Mark, as we may, if you ever look at the book, it's a lot like Matthew and Luke, because Matthew and Luke each had access to Mark, and so the authors, we don't know the names of any of these people. We later in the next couple centuries, Christians ascribed them to these names and put those names on them, but there's no reason to imagine that any of the authors of these books were named any of those things.
But weren't they 4 distinct faith traditions, like communities of Christians?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So every single person, what we never understand with these things is that every single one of these people is an author. They have their own authorial kind of point of view that they're trying to get across. They've got a message, and their message is also being presented to a particular audience. And so instead, what we try to do is piece it all together, and then we add all of our own apocryphal pieces too, like the donkey, everything like that, Shrek or whoever it is, to the Jar Jar Binks character or whatever that are in these things, but in fact we don't actually pay a lot of attention. And so, like I say, in the Hamer family Christmas pageant, we would read a little bit of Luke, and then we'd switch to Matthew at a certain point, and maybe go back to Luke, and so we'd read it as if it was one story, but it's two couple stories. And the original story, Mark, includes no nativity. So Mark starts out, that gospel starts out, with the beginning of the historical of Jesus' actual ministry, like you say, where he is a disciple of John the Baptist. And so it starts with an adult Jesus in the John the Baptist story.
Well, Mormons don't believe he was a disciple of John the Baptist.
So you're saying that's the earliest version of the Christmas story that's told? There's the John version?
No, there's no. He's talking about Mark.
Mark. In the Mark version, there's no nativity at all.
Okay.
And so what ends up happening is that that the person who we call Matthew, the person that we call Luke, they have access to this book that the person we call Mark wrote, and they hate it. They absolutely hate this book. This book doesn't tell the story the way they like it at all, and
because they want it to be more magical and more special and
more in line with their faith tradition.
Right. Their community understands the story differently than when they get a hold of this text. On the other hand, here's a text, and they've never seen this text before. Nobody's ever written this kind of a life of Jesus kind of, or a ministry of Jesus text before. And so now they have it, and now they have to, and even in the author of Luke actually even writes, because we have seen that people have tried to write these things so many times and have done such a bad job of it, I'm going to correct it, and I'm going to write a better one.
So the order, it goes Mark, Matthew, John, Luke?
No.
Mark, Matthew, Luke, John.
Oh, Luke, John. Okay.
And Matthew and Luke are writing simultaneously, but they do not have access to each other's texts.
So
they do possibly also have another source text in addition to Mark, which is designated as Q, which would be the teachings of Jesus, which they both have material from. But then in addition to that, both Matthew and Luke have some idiosyncratic, unique material. And this is not actually a lot, but the birth narratives are both part of that idiosyncratic material that they don't appear to have had each other's version for, because they're being written by two different communities at roughly the same time, which is why they're so different. And they get their dates wrong, they get their leaders wrong, so they can't really be reconciled.
Okay. So we're starting with the earliest version, which is found in Matthew.
Right. So exactly. So we're just going to start by saying Mark is the earliest, as is, like Heather says, Q, which is this lost gospel, sayings gospel. We don't know for sure that it existed, but it almost certainly did. And that may be even earlier than Mark, but it's gone. We don't have it except for the fact that both Luke and Matthew are incorporating massive amounts of it into their Gospels, and so they're each sharing a text, but they don't seem to know about each other. So it's not like Matthew is dependent on Luke or Luke is dependent on Matthew. Rather, Matthew and Luke are dependent on both Q and Mark.
All right.
And so Mark and Matthew get a hold, or Matthew, let's go to Matthew then, since that's what we're going to start with. He gets a hold of this, and as he's reading this story, he doesn't think that it makes any sense to start a story of the life of Jesus at when Jesus is getting baptized by John the Baptist. He wants to start at the beginning of, like a birth of Jesus. And so he introduces first a lineage, and he creates a lineage that sort of sounds like an Old Testament lineage where you have this whole long list of begats, and then that leads to Joseph and Mary and then Jesus. And then he has a story. And like I say, we tend to read these stories together and we conflate them, but they're actually very, very different. And so what I thought we'd do today is we'll read the two different texts and we'll talk about each one individually. And so if people want to does somebody want to read the beginning? We're starting
even
at
just to add to that, John, so it's not just Matthew who comes up with a lineage. Separately, Luke comes up with a lineage, and that's in Luke 3. And they both trace Jesus' line through Joseph back to different sons of David.
Right.
Which is a big problem.
Right. So exactly. So essentially both Matthew and Luke, the authors of, we'll just call them that. That's not their names. So anyway, we don't know. These are anonymous authors. Anyway, Matthew and Luke both have the idea that the Messiah has to be from the house of David. Right. And so they they create a lineage, but these lineages are not the same as each other. And Matthew's, for example, contradicts the Old Testament even. And so he wants to have like 14 generations to this and that and the other thing. So in other words, to add it all up, he deletes people and
because back then 7 was kind of a magical number. So double 7 is double magical.
Right. So he made a magical lineage, and so in order to do that, he had to screw with the records, and he all the ones between the most recent generations are all fictional. So
when he's doing
nice
the doubles, when he's doing the double 7, is that because it had been prophesied that it would be, a seventh generation, or is he really just kind of making it up there? Is he trying to he's not retrofitting it to some previous prophecy?
Not to that prophecy. There's no prophecy of the number of 7, but there are prophecies about a son of David.
Yeah, he had to be a descendant of David. Because David was their last great king before they became like captives forever.
Which also wasn't true, but...
Yeah, but that's where they're
the tradition that they're going from.
The House of David. So in other words, there's the Old Testament prophecy of the House of David that was written right before the destruction of Jerusalem was that the scepter will never fall from Judah and the House of David. And so the idea, like there had already this line of kings had been existing for whatever it had been 200 years, and then the prophet prophesied right away that it would never fall, and then like one generation later it falls. and so that's like the conundrum of the Old Testament, is this failed prophecy. And so when that failed prophecy happens, then there's a lot of people who start to begin prophesying that there's going to be a new David that's going to rise, a new Messiah. And as we talked about, Messiah just means anointed one, which just means king. And so a new king of Jerusalem, a new king of Judah will come from this same royal house. And so that's why.
All right, so who wants to read?
So we're going to start at Matthew 1:18. Let's just skip the big ads.
Yeah. I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah. Wait, what translation is this? This is not the King James.
This is the New Revised Standard.
Okay. Now, the birth of Jesus the Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, if you know what I mean, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. That was nice. But rather than have her stoned.
Right.
But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, very important, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, which means salvation, right? For he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. I can't say look, it's behold. Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel.
Just let go of your Mormon baggage.
I love these stories so much. I think I could say them by memory. So Isaiah, that's from Isaiah 7:14, which means, so Emmanuel means God is with us. When Joseph awoke from his sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had borne a son, and he named him Jesus, which is not what the angel told them to do. No, it was not what the prophecy said. They said to name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. But they named him Yeshua, which means salvation. So they're trying so hard here to get, the author of Matthew is trying to get this prophecy to work out. Right. And it's like, you got to choose one or the other. All right. So we're getting the virgin birth out of this. Emmanuel's kind of close. All right, we'll just leave it. And then they named him Jesus.
Yeah, and so this is already highlighting, like you're saying, this one of these authorial interests of the author of Matthew. And so Matthew is really, 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 really interested in taking Old Testament prophets and different sayings about them, and actually taking them crazily out of context, and then piecing those together as if those then predicted Jesus.
Well, and this is like another data point in the argument from embarrassment that supports that there was a historical Jesus, is if they made this story out of whole cloth, his name would have been Emmanuel. But everyone knew his name was Jesus. And so they try so hard to retrofit, but they have to deal with problems like his name was Jesus, and guess what? He's also from Nazareth.
Right.
We'll get to that.
Yep. And so exactly. So since his name was Jesus and not Emmanuel, it doesn't really fit the prophecy here. Also, this prophecy here where it says the virgin shall conceive, so that is highlighting the fact that Matthew here is working from the Septuagint, which is to say the Greek Old Testament. And so Matthew is a Greek writer, and that is the way that is translated in the Septuagint, but in the Hebrew text, this is just the young woman or something. It has nothing to do with virginity. So.
Where it's more like the way we understand maiden, where if I said maiden, yes, at one point it meant, that you're a virgin, but it also just means young girl. It could be either way.
Right.
All right, continue.
Hey, I'll read it.
Okay.
In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, and I'm going to do this in my Monty Python voice, where is the child? No, I'm not going to.
Your Life of Brian voice.
Yeah, the Life of Brian voice. Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage. Because the H is silent.
Right. Homage?
Yeah.
You're a drunk.
Yeah. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened. How are you? That's waiting for Guthman. And all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Micah 5:2. You want me to keep going?
No, that's good. Okay, so we can talk about that.
This story never happened.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So part of the thing that when people were writing biographies in antiquity, people didn't have the sense that we have now. So nowadays we have this idea of like Freud and psychology, and we have this idea that these encounters that you have in young age, you'll tell like a story of how something happened to you as a kid, and that had like this impact on your life, and that's why you're so loyal now, or that's why you're so noble, or whatever it is. That's why, in other words, this thing that happened to you caused you to learn that life lesson. They had no sense of that at all, that there was some kind of psychological development in antiquity. Instead, the whole idea of antiquity is that people had an innate character that was like just from birth, and so when people would then go ahead and write stories and create stories about Caesar or about anybody, they would show how like there were all these signs that indicated, that they were this incredible person right from the start. And so Matthew, not having any stories at all from Mark, what he's doing here is saying there are signs here that's going to indicate that this is somebody who has like an incredible life predestined to him. So.
Yeah, and
but the only thing they have in common really is the virgin birth. And in Matthew, it's Joseph who receives these visitations in the night that tell him that it's the Holy Spirit. And in Luke, you get the annunciation of Gabriel to Mary, so she actually knows what's going on. You have no idea what's going on, what is in Mary's head. In Matthew, it could people have postulated that, he was an illegitimate child, but he would have been adopted. As soon as Joseph marries her, then he's adopted into the lineage of David either way. But this whole idea of the star appearing as one of those signs that, shows that the birth is miraculous, that's another thing that you can point to and say it would not, there's no evidence for it. Like, what would the new star have been? Could it be a comet? Could it be a supernova? The problem is there should be a record of it, because the Greeks and the Romans were very good record keepers, and they were always looking at the sky for signs. They were practicing astronomy and astrology. If something happened in the sky, they talked about it. and even like stars showing up or new stars were evil omens. Comets were.
There was
like a
though.
famine coming.
No, but there is another record separate from this of a star appearing in the sky. I don't have it at my fingertips, but it was in the on the American continent.
It was Nephi.
There was,
I was like,
they saw it too.
That's true.
And
what the hell are you talking about?
One of the prophets at the time was named Nephi, and he just like left and disappeared. And some have said that he was one of these wise men from the east who was there at Jesus' birth. It was Nephi from our, we know.
But was that in North America or South America? Because the hemispheric sky is very different.
I mean,
South America.
Yeah.
Which theory are you going with, Glenn?
The only difference is that it made it look like it was there for 3 whole days, and then there was no night or something like that. That's the hemispheric
difference. A day, a night,
but,
and a day, as if it were one day, as it were.
That's when he dies.
Yeah.
But what I
birth stories.
Okay. Hey. Look,
the thing,
it's true.
Are you bearing your testimony?
Also, wasn't Jesus born in Jerusalem? I think everyone who's read Alma knows that Jesus was born in Jerusalem.
No, you're wrong.
The land of Jerusalem.
No.
Oh, right, the land.
No,
how were they supposed to know? It had been hundreds of years since they had even been there.
No, this is
give them a break, Heather.
This is an actual story from my mission. Evangelical fundamentalist Christian bashed with me on the doorstep. She said, "I can prove your church is false. Joseph Smith claims in this book that it's the most correct book on the planet, and it says that he was born in Jerusalem." And I countered with, "No, it literally says he was born at Jerusalem, which is in proximity of." It says at. Look it up. He was born.
Look at the preposition.
Look it up. It says at Jerusalem.
There you go. QED.
And then you said, and I've been Joseph and an ass. So there.
But what I wanted to say about this verse is that it's so fantastical. The idea that, but even before Jesus was born, like the puppet king of the Romans, Herod, knew about it and was scared and reacted about this baby that's going to be born. Where, it seems like there'd be a record of that kind of a disturbance.
Yeah, especially if all of Jerusalem was troubled with him.
Whole
why would
city.
they be troubled?
Yeah.
The whole city.
They didn't like Herod. Herod was a tyrant. He was a murderer. He was
There's going to be stuff with Herod in this story, in Matthew's story, that would have been recorded. So there's no doubt that all of this stuff is Matthew's invention and not history with Herod. So.
But it's kind of great just for narrative tension that you have this like evil king out to kill this upstart nobody born in Bethlehem. I think it works. I like it.
All right, I guess
okay.
I'll go over.
It's a Disney villain.
Yeah.
Are we on 6 according to your
7? I think
7.
Then Herod.
Then Herod secretly called for the wise men. Everybody loves the wise men. One of them's always black for some reason.
Right.
Then,
although when Matthew's writing this, he's referring to Zoroastrians probably. So this is probably Persians.
Okay.
In other words, but yes,
they're kind of dark.
Ultimately, there's not 3 wise men too. By the way, in the story,
there's 3 gifts.
3 gifts.
Yes, yeah. So they make it to 3
we'll
wise men.
We'll get there.
Go ahead.
Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned.
Learned.
From, I thought he was talking about the learned. And learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where... See, this is in here.
Oh, there it is. You're right.
Yeah, until it stopped over the place where the child was. Like, there's a fucking star hovering 30 feet above this thing.
Yeah. Well, Matthew doesn't know a lot about astrology.
No.
Maybe it was like a firefly.
It's like you can't follow a star to an address.
right?
It doesn't work.
No.
When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed. This is so cartoonishly funny to me now. Sorry. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Should I keep going, or?
No, that's good.
Okay.
So like you're pointing out, the star thing here has gotten crazy.
It's silly.
And then also the so now we're gonna start to see here like some contradictions to obviously the way that people try to reconcile this with Luke's account is that they make this happen like way later, but essentially they say, on entering the house. So what we can kind of indicate here, in other words, they're in a house, they're not in a stable, obviously. So the wise men here aren't coming to like some kind of stable with shepherds and mangers and cows and donkeys. Instead, they're going to a house. And by the way, there is no indication at all that has happened all the way up until this moment that Joseph and Mary are from Nazareth and they're just visiting Bethlehem. They just have a house. They live in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
That's where they live. And so there's nothing to indicate here in Matthew's understanding of this story that that these guys are from anywhere besides Bethlehem at this point.
Right. And I remember being told, well, first of all, my kids were watching Studio C last night. Do you know what that is? That's the comedy troupe from BYU.
Oh, yes. My little brother adores it.
So painful. Yeah, people eat it up so much. Yeah. But there was a funny skit about like the fourth wise man who like put it off to the last minute and had to get a gift card. So he was too ashamed to show up. Anyway.
That's as edgy as they get.
I know. And then it's like, oh, yeah, the three wise men, that'll catch on. Anyway, but so these gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, I remember in seminary how these were, so meaningful because gold, well, who doesn't like gold? And frankincense is the prayers of heaven rising up, and myrrh is, anointing at his burial. So, like herbs to anoint with at the burial. So even in this... In this moment of his nascency, it's prefiguring the moment of his pre-resurrection. So I think, and if the author was meaning to do that, I think it's lovely. I think it works.
I think he is meaning to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think
it's like they have in the life of Brian. Thanks very much for the gold and frankincense, but go easy on the myrrh next time.
Right. You can keep that garbage gift. I love that, and that's the guy that's playing the mother of Brian.
I know,
so awesome.
Are you a virgin? What?
She goes off to give a blowjob to a centurion or something like that. All right, John, I think it's your turn to read.
Okay. And so then they left for the own country by another road. That's where we were?
Yep.
Okay. So now, after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child and destroy him." Then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, quote, "Out of Egypt I shall call my son," which is quoting Hosea 11:1. But Hosea there is this is again, so just to explain like how Matthew's idea of this thing, Hosea there is, if you go into the context of what Hosea is actually talking about, out of Egypt I've called my son, he's referring specifically to Israel, the children of Israel. So
wouldn't it have been to Moses?
The Israel nation
the
being
story,
liberated.
In other words, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt according to the story, and that they had come out of Egypt and they have been called. And so that's what Hosea is saying. So this is not in any way a prophecy about a future Messiah at all, at least as far as Hosea was saying, Matthew has a different idea of these things. So Matthew's idea is that all of these nuggets out of Scripture can be repurposed to talk about Jesus.
Well, it gives it validation and it makes it seem well, it also ties it into the most important Israelite story, which is the liberation from bondage in Egypt as well, which is like foremost in the Israelite nation's memory and tradition. And then he kind of takes that Egyptian thing and runs with it, because that's clearly where the slaughter of the innocent stuff comes from. Well, that and Herod kills his own sons. That we actually do have documentation of, that Herod was, killed his own sons because he was worried about them taking over his power. But yeah, he just sort of is like, all right, well, let's use some of this other Old Testament stuff here too, and let's connect Egypt in many ways. And even like the slaughter of innocents itself is so nonsensical.
Well, it sounds to me like the author of Matthew really likes poetic symmetry in the writing. You said this kind of tongue-in-cheek a couple minutes ago, Heather, that, writing about this, putting this in the beginning is foreshadowing the ending almost as if he knew it. And John's like, yeah, because he did. Mm-hmm. Here it is again. So maybe it's not really just an error that he's reading from Hosea, but he's really trying and stretching to get this poetic symmetry that just like the Israelites came out of Egypt, so did the Messiah also come out of Egypt. And, the more of these parallels that you have, the stronger you feel the Spirit when you identify the parallels, and you're like, oh, it must be. Right?
No, he's doing that very deliberately. No, he's doing that very deliberately.
There's no explanation for that.
He's constantly doing that. So this is a literary work. Matthew is a literary work, and so he is writing, and he's actually crafting like episodes where Jesus gives like X number of sermons and X number of things, and so it's all entirely timed episodically in order to make a literary whole. It has nothing to do with. It's not history, so.
But tell me who his audience is, John. I can't remember whether
Jews.
This was for. Is it the Jewish audience, or is it the? Well, yes, but is it in the diaspora? Is it a Greek Jewish audience?
It's obviously Greek speaking because he's writing in Greek, but it is definitely Matthew is more concerned with a Greek. Greek-speaker Jews who have converted to Christianity, and they're the people he's writing to, because he's actually very interested in showing to them that Jesus had to have been the Messiah biblically. Right.
Which I think is why you have all of this from the Hebrew scriptures, because these are like the Christian scriptures, the New Testament. So you have this constant tie-in to the old stories of the Hebrew scriptures and trying to associate Jesus with the figure of Moses.
Right. But Luke is going to have, when we get to Luke is going to have like intent. Luke loves the Hebrew scriptures too, but is not writing to the same audience at all. And so Luke loves all that stuff and is drawing from it and is creatively creating stories based on the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, but is not writing specifically to Greek-speaking Jews the way Matthew is. Matthew is doing that, and so Matthew is very interested. So Matthew is his gospel is saying essentially, like when it comes down to brass tacks, Jesus is not replacing the law. The law is entirely intact. We still have to obey the law, get circumcised, all that kind of thing. And so, which is completely different from what Luke's position is.
Yeah, which really was Peter. There's Peter's position and there was Paul's position. I think they had kind of a conflict where Peter wanted to kind of just make Christianity just an offshoot of Judaism, where Paul, makes me think that Luke was more of a follower of Paul,
right,
and Matthew was more of a follower of Peter. That tradition.
Right. Yeah. So in that same kind of idea. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right.
All right, Heather, you're up.
Is it me again? All right. We've just read Hosea, right? When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, I always picture him as that, who's the villain in Aladdin?
Yeah, Jafar.
Jafar. I always picture Herod as Jafar. Do you really picture him?
I was doing it earlier, yeah.
Does he have an Iago?
Yeah, he's got the little bird.
Or Iago. Patience, Iago. patience.
Tricked by them? What's that? Oh, I'm so surprised. I think I'm going to have a heart attack and die from surprise.
Sorry,
Astrologers.
edit that out.
That was awesome. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more, Jeremiah 31. Which could mean anything, could apply to, pick your battle in which a lot of Hebrew children died. And
yeah, because Ramah is not Bethlehem. Ramah is north of Jerusalem. So anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, is this another one of these indications that he had these Old Testament Hebrew scriptures in mind that he wanted to use as validation, and so he created a story around it to say this is what that was prophesying?
Yeah, exactly. So this is an echo of the Moses story. So Moses, in the Moses story, the Pharaoh kills the firstborn of Israel, or has killed, and so
age, right?
and so the same exact thing is happening here in this story. But this is the moment here where we can say, there's no way, even though this is negative evidence. So in a lot of cases in history, when we have ancient history, we don't have all of ancient history. We only have what survived. So we only have when people wrote stuff down and that passed to us and it came to us. And so very important things just did not survive and get written down and survive all the way to us. But in this case, the idea that Herod actually massacred all these babies, when we actually have this intensely detailed history by Josephus, who is a first century of the Common Era Jewish historian writing to the Roman audience, and he writes 3 major books on Jewish history, and Herod is a major character. The idea in this case that Josephus wouldn't include this event if this event actually happened is pretty much
preposterous.
Just so, it's absolutely preposterous. It's so silly and stupid. So in other words, there's no way in hell that this happened.
So I want to take a stab at just pure speculation here. So I've got a blue shirt on. And so it's talking about Rachel weeping for her children. Now, Rachel was the younger sister of Leah, right? And both of them were married to Israel, right? And Rachel had 2 kids, Joseph, who was the favorite, and that's why all the other ones were jealous of him and threw him in the pit and blah, blah, blah. And then what was it, Benjamin? I don't know. There were 2.
And Joseph has 2 kids, Ephraim and Manasseh. So we're talking about the northern kingdom.
Yeah, we're talking exactly. So we're talking about the northern kingdom. So this prophecy, or this scripture in Jeremiah, if it's put in context, is probably talking about the northern kingdom being taken in captivity by the Assyrians, and not talking about the whole of Israel, because the whole of Israel would not be represented by Rachel as their mother.
It's not even the whole of Israel. It's the land of Bethlehem that he's applying it to.
Right. And like you were pointing out, Glenn, it's north.
Right.
Ramah,
it's the northern kingdom.
And in Benjamin or in Ephraim, one of the two, wherever Ramah is, but it's like a little bit north of Judah. It's Jerusalem, and so it's either, depending on where the border of Benjamin and Ephraim is, it's up there. And so that's why it's Rachel, because we're talking about the northern kingdom. So
the original context in Jeremiah is referring to something completely different than what Matthew is pulling it out for.
Right.
Well, and even, he's the author here is creating this parallel to what happened in Egypt, which also almost certainly never happened, because there's no record of Pharaoh ever ordering the slaughter of all the newborn Hebrews, which would be a ridiculous idea anyway. It's utter nonsense to say slaveholders say, oh, we have too many slaves. That's like saying I have too much cattle or I have too much money. If you did, you would sell them. The last thing you would do is kill your workforce.
Right.
So even that is, a ridiculous story which was created for the pathos of Moses, which was created for Moses's nativity story.
Moses.
The
So let it be written.
The first,
So let it be done.
We have wonderful records from Egypt.
yeah, they wrote a lot of shit down.
And the reality is that they were able to write it on papyrus. The papyrus survives because there's no water in Egypt, and so the result is we have better records from there than almost anywhere else.
Which is how we got the Book of Abraham.
Hebrews.
Which is how we got the
Yeah, how we got it.
From the first
Michael
century BC.
Chandler brought him to Kirtland.
Exactly.
All right,
Abraham.
Glenn,
All right.
Glenn, I think you're up.
Okay, I am going to finish up Matthew here. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. To those who were seeking the child's life are dead." I'll say that again. For those who were seeking the child's life are dead. Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard Archelaus?
Yeah.
Is that right? When he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee.
And that's
there
how he got
made
to
his home. That's how he got to. Yeah, insert the. So that's how he got to. From the,
Exactly.
the Santa Claus coming down thing. You mentioned earlier.
That's why Santa Claus has whiskers.
Right. And that's why Jesus was in Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. Nailed it. Judges 13:5.
You can't explain that.
Oh my God, that's so bad. That's like Matthew's worst one out of this whole thing. I mean, Matthew is out of control when he comes.
No wonder the author of Matthew didn't use his real name.
I know,
right?
Good Lord! But that one's the worst. So this last one here, Nazarene. So this is like this special type of priestly class that Samson was. And so how like Samson's power had been because he refused to cut his hair.
John, we're not using the word special anymore on this podcast.
Okay,
Come on, Glenn.
This very particular class of Israelite, where you had a special laws that applied to you, where you didn't, eat meat,
John,
hair, all this kind of thing. So, in any event, that has nothing to do. Being a Nazarite has nothing to do with being from Nazareth. So anyway, it's just totally not related. This is
embarrassing.
This is like taking your mallet and smashing like a star-shaped toy into like a rectangular shaped hole.
Yeah.
Just force fitting, so-called prophecies of your Messiah.
But what we can see here with Matthew, though, is that in other words, this is a story. That's the whole story. We don't have shepherds. We don't have all these other things. We don't have like a visitation to Mary. The angels are coming to Joseph. Joseph is the guy.
He's in a house.
He's in a house. There's like super important Zoroastrian priests who are wise, and they are going and visiting the king, and all of this stuff is happening like with kings and Egypt and big stuff.
And everybody knows about it. Like his birth is not. That's like the big news of the day.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Messiah is about to get born, y'all. This is going down.
And that's why this made it into Josephus and every other prophet.
Right.
Yes.
All the way to the other side of the world.
All the way to America.
All the way into the
Yeah.
Let's not forget. Don't forget about you didn't include the Nephite version of the.
We don't have time.
The Christmas story.
You guys actually have to sleep tonight.
Are you recording, Randy?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do like.
Oh, we got to start over. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh no, I do have to say I like the Luke one better. I mean, Matthew is fine, but I don't know. I kind of like the one where they're poorer, because in Matthew they're not poor schmoes from Nazareth. They're living in a house in Bethlehem, and they've got enough money to go live in to travel 200 miles to Egypt for a few years and come back. So I don't, and they're being visited by the kings or the wise men and
getting all this gold.
And getting gold. Yeah. They're set up. They're set up from he's a trust fund baby in this one.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess because I grew up poor that I just always connected with the Luke version better, where it's much more about like trying to humanize him, and he's just one of the people, and it's like a Cinderella story. He starts from nothing. He's a self-made man. So
well, and remember, Luke is the more popular one. I mean, that's the nativity scene.
Right.
That's the pageants.
Well,
the angels sing in Luke. In this one, they just appear in dreams and tell you to move. But they sing in Luke. It's much more exciting.
And
people like wise men, though. I mean, because those guys.
That's all. That's about it, isn't it? Isn't wise men from like all you can incorporate in the star?
No. Well, Herod killing everybody.
That's not something that you'd put in a pageant.
It's just like
kill the kids.
You never.
Oh, you do.
You never reenacted the massacre of the innocents as in the Snyder family pageant.
All children young to slay.
That is a great idea. Why doesn't that happen? That would make it so much more fun. Like with the little beanbag. We had beanbags that were made of like a little beanbag nativity, and we would use those to act out Luke. We should have done Matthew and Herod's. That's awesome.
Just get like a bunch of lightsabers and a bunch of Cabbage Patch.
Yes.
Just like the whole massacre of the Sand People.
Or Legos, because you can take their heads off and then put them back on.
Oh.
We can use Lego figures.
So I have to invoke my mission president, because I always do when he have you guys ever seen Luke 2, the church video?
No.
Yes, of course.
My mission president made that, and they made it on site in Jerusalem. And the only
that's the one where there's like no speaking, right? Or,
no, it's all
like in local.
I think it was
no subtitles.
I think it was in Hebrew, because I don't think they had enough people that speak Aramaic. But it was filmed on site, and the only two American actors in the whole movie. Everyone else is a native of the local area. The only two are Joseph and Mary.
That's easy to guess. I was going to guess that. Well, except for the angel. I mean, if there were angels.
No, It's kind of like they wanted to make it seem like an indie film, like raw, and like this is what it would look like if you could go back in time and just watch what happened. And he was really proud of the barn scene, because he thought that this is the most authentic, barn. This is how a barn would look like 2,000 years ago. It was like a cave, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no barn in Matthew.
There's a manger.
Called Luke 2. Did you not listen to me?
There's no barn in Luke either. There's a manger. That's it.
But a manger would be in a barn.
Are you sure? Were you there?
Were
you there?
Were you there?
Yeah, exactly.
Were you there?
Just in the houses.
Okay, well, I don't know.
No, I was taught that too. That if somebody had a nativity that showed them in a cave, that they were really faithful, that they cared about the story of Jesus, that they were scriptorians, because it would have been in a cave.
But
my favorite version of the story was the one where it was acted out on stage, and there was one kid who was a perfectly awesome kid that couldn't stand to see the innkeeper deny Jesus and Mary. So he said, "Come in, you can stay at my place."
I've heard that. That's such a horrible story.
That's like somebody who stood up in a performance of...
I'm not going to say that kid was special, but that's an element of the story.
Let it go,
right?
Glenn. Let it go.
Yeah. The cave, I think, is from the Apocrypha. So it's from the Proto-Evangelium of James. So there's a bunch of different elements of the story that we the way we have it, that come from apocryphal books that we don't use because they're insane. But
awesome sometimes.
Whereas these are so legit.
Well, you can't believe how insane the Proto-Evangelium is. The kind of thing that because it's the whole young young, like toddler Jesus, and toddler Jesus is like, like he like hangs out with the little other boys, and the other boys will say something. It's like, "Well, curse you and die then." just like,
oh, that's a Twilight episode.
What are
what are these?
What are these
Zone episodes?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that's where.
What are these apocryphal books, John?
The Proto-Evangelium of James,
and it's got like Jesus from a toddler to 12.
Yeah,
like the missing years
with superpowers, dude.
Yeah.
Why haven't I heard this from Mike Tannehill?
I don't, because frankly, it does interact with our understanding of the story. So, like you're talking about having it in a cave and stuff like that. That those kind of details come from these apocryphal stories that still were important for the art and everything. And so, like, you can go to like medieval cathedrals in Europe that have images from these apocryphal gospels, but that they're not in the canon now.
You know who uses those are like these pseudo scholars, motivational speaker. Like his name is Don Black. He used all these apocryphal stories. Like he's I'm going to let you in on a secret, kids. When Jesus was a young boy, Joseph wasn't a very good carpenter. And when the stuff he would make was a little crooked, Jesus would reach up and touch it and straighten it.
Yeah, exactly.
Aww. Right? No. They did that. They did that in the Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ, where he like invents the table.
Yeah,
chairs. Someday people will want to sit at a table and not on the ground. And Mary laughs at him. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Isn't there like a Saturday Night Live that's like, oh, we found these relics of from antiquity where Jesus, they're like things that Jesus had made, and they're these like terrible tables, they're all rickety.
Oh no, I don't remember that. That's great.
Good thing that he had a side job because he was never going to make it.
He wasn't a good carpenter.
Don't quit your day job.
That reminds me of Bart's line when Marge takes up carpentry and he's like, "Wow, Mom, you're like the Jesus of carpenters." And she's like, "Oh, such sweet blasphemy, Bart." All right. With Luke 2.
Okay.
Whose turn?
Mine, I guess.
Great.
Okay. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should
Caesar Augustus. This is disorienting me, not using the King James. Because I know Luke 2 really well. I didn't know Matthew very well.
Yeah, but that's such a bad translation.
I know, but it's familiar. Anyway, go ahead.
Wasn't Emperor Augustus in some records also said to have been born from a virgin birth?
Yeah. I think it was Julius Caesar.
So Julius Caesar sometimes claimed that his mother was Aphrodite, was Venus.
Mm.
That's not as cool. Anyway.
But wait, Julius Caesar was the first cesarean section, right? So Aphrodite had a C-section?
No,
I don't get it.
No, it wasn't a cesarean section, I don't think. I don't remember how it worked. Anyway, they're definitely descended from Aphrodite, however it worked. So,
definitely.
That's in the Aeneid. So,
right.
Which Augustus commissioned. So they're definitely from the Venus family.
Yeah, I was going to say Aphrodite's the Greek name. It's Venus.
The Greek name, Venus, the Venus family. So, okay, all the world should be registered. And this was the first registration, and it was taken while Quirinus was governor of Syria, and all went to their own towns to be registered. This is crap, by the way.
Of course it is. It's ridiculous.
I mean, should we just stop on every sentence here?
That never happened.
You know, John, the title of this episode is John Hamer Shits on Everyone's Christmas.
Yeah.
That's what we're titling this episode.
Yeah, that didn't happen. Okay. So Jesus...
It's not real, people.
That didn't happen. Okay.
It's not real.
Because the Roman emperors did not give a rat's ass for what hometown you might have been from.
Right.
They cared was...
Not just your hometown, but like who you descended from 1,000 years ago.
Exactly.
I can't name who I've descended from 1,000 years ago.
Exactly. They're like, where in the name of hell do you live now? How much money do you have? And are you going to give it to us? Because we want it. Right. I mean, that's what the idea is. We do not care where you're from or who you are or anything. We want your money. Okay. So Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth. So in this case, see, Joseph lives in Nazareth to begin with in this story. In Galilee, to Judea, to the city of David, called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. Okay, go ahead, Heather.
Well, I'm just saying, well, this gets the wrong ruler again. Well, I mean, they're conflicting here. So Luke has it under King Herod's rule, and Quirinius doesn't take over until after King Herod's rule.
Right.
So, the census, which the registration that they do, takes place 2 or 3 years after the birth of Jesus anyway. So the dates are all wrong.
All of Luke's dates don't work. And so, in fact, Luke is trying to do here is, so Luke has a completely different basis and where Luke is coming from than what Matthew was coming from. So when we were talking about Matthew before, we're talking about somebody who is a Greek-speaking Jewish Christian who is talking to other Greek-speaking Jewish Christians and is very interested in that. Luke is more likely a Gentile who is Greek-speaking, who is very interested in the Septuagint and actually knows it backwards and forwards, but is not in fact Jewish because doesn't understand Judaism very well. So,
right,
and actually also doesn't get the dates well. So Luke is trying to write all of these things here, where Luke is saying that so and so was in charge of this and that and the other thing. And so there's almost always trying to be like a Hellenistic chronology, but it's not it doesn't actually work. So.
Right. And again, and because he starts him out in Nazareth, then he has to come up with this pretext for getting him to Bethlehem.
Because everybody knew he was from Nazareth.
From Nazareth, right. So then he's got this story about how everybody has to go to a different city and to align him again with the Davidic prophecies.
Right. So we have the two different authors here are faced with the same issue, which is we know Jesus is from Nazareth, but we know that the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. And so the two of them have come up with different ways to make it happen. So Matthew's way was they're from Bethlehem, and then they have this little Egyptian sojourn, and then after we're done with Egypt now, and then they go up to Nazareth because that's where they wanted to live, and they're or whatever. They're going to live in this podunk pratball village. You're like, okay, you're done with Egypt, so now why don't you go move to Nazareth? Because
why didn't they?
A Nazarene.
Why didn't they just go straight to Nazareth? Because they knew that he was just killing the babies in Bethlehem. Why did they have to go all the way to Egypt? They could have gone straight to Nazareth.
Because the prophecy said out of Egypt.
Oh yes, of course.
We forgot about that prophecy.
Yes.
We forgot about it. So I mean, and so by the way, since Matthew made that up, it was important enough to put that in. So in other words, Matthew was interested in getting that in there and wanted to have it out of Egypt because of, like you were pointing out, that Israel had come out of Egypt according to its historic or sacred stories, and so therefore you wanted to have Jesus follow that same pattern, but it's a literary thing.
Yeah, and it's also just good evidence that they're working backward from this conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah, the King, and trying to connect the dots from there in whatever way they can. And it's different ways.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so we got to Bethlehem.
Joseph also went from the town. That's where we left off.
Yeah, Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David, although he was not. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, who was expected.
Wait. How do you know that he wasn't, John?
There's none of the Davidic line exists in the Bible after the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. And so when the exiles first come back to Jerusalem, they are led by
exiles.
Exiles.
Oh, the ones in exile.
Yeah. So when the people that have been exiled to Babylon, when they come back from Babylon to Jerusalem, when the Persians take over Babylon and create the Persian Empire across the entire Middle East, the Persian emperor says,
"This is like the Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and
Daniel
on the lion's den. This is their style."
Yeah, those guys. So they were off.
So when they come back,
Babylon.
there's no like descendants of David.
There
that
is
are part of
one.
it.
There's a guy. He's named Zerubbabel, which is a Babylonian word which means a guy born in Babylon.
Babel.
Zerubbabel.
Babel.
Yep, Zerubbabel. Yep. So Zerubbabel, and so Zerubbabel disappears though in the text, and then he's gone. And then after he's gone, suddenly, like this thing, which is the most important thing in the whole damn Hebrew Bible, which is that this covenant,
the lineage
the house
of David,
and the idea that the house of David will rule forever. Like Zerubbabel they stopped talking about him, and he's gone.
Did Luke and Matthew link to Zerubbabel?
Yeah, so they put him in the.
They both do.
They put him in the lineage, but it doesn't. But it doesn't exist in the Old Testament text. So essentially, what happens? We don't know what happens because there's nothing there.
Because we don't have the brass plates.
Yeah. Well, the brass plates
predate this.
Yeah, the brass plates wouldn't know what happened to this. We have nothing. But essentially, what happens is that the Persian authorities, at a certain point, think that the Davidic kings are too dangerous, and so they get rid of them, and they instead have the Zadokite priesthood, the descendants of Aaron, who are the priests, the high priests, that the Persian emperors can appoint, the Sadducees, and so they are the people that end up being able to be in charge of the city and the temple and everything like that, and that's the core, and they get rid of the Davidic house. And then it doesn't exist anymore, and so there's no reference to it in the Bible after that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the entire Old Testament, as summarized by John Hamer.
John Hamer, yay!
You're getting your money's worth.
Yeah, my God, I'm learning so much. Like I never dreamed that I would learn what happened to David's, descendants.
I'll be lucky if I remember Zerubbabel.
Oh, poor old Zerubbabel. Anyway, he disappears. So we don't know what happened. And so David, so what do we got? He was registered, and he went, and then while they were there, she's expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver the child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. And so we're starting this Luke story actually in the second chapter. There was this whole chapter that happened ahead of time where Luke creates a relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist where they're cousins, because Luke creates a story about Elizabeth, who
is this the baby is this when John the Baptist jumps in her womb?
This is the in utero greeting. Yes,
in utero greeting, and it's essentially a retelling of the story of Samson's mother, because again, Luke is a very has read the Septuagint backwards and forwards and creates almost all of the Lucan material that doesn't exist anywhere else. You can almost always draw it out of the Old Testament, where Luke is repeating previous stories. And so essentially Samson's mother and also Samuel's mother had both been barren and hadn't been able to have children, and they made a covenant with God and that kind of thing. So
that's in chapter 1.
That was in chapter 1 that we skipped.
So we're in chapter 2.
Now we got to, there's no room for them at the end. This is the regular Christmas story. So there we are. Go ahead.
And this is the part that I love. It's just there's so much pathos there. Like they're in this city. She's pregnant. There's nowhere to go. They have to go to an inn. She wraps him in swaddling clothes. It's just very nice. It's this whole humanizing of Jesus. He's so of the people.
Right.
Yeah.
And she lays him in a manger, which is a because that's the place where the food for the cattle would be, which is the foreshadowing of Jesus being the bread of life and the living water, and
this is
where, like that Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation when we're
stop loving it, Heather. Stop it.
I will not. I love
stop loving it.
Luke is a great writer.
And I will, come December 24th, I will tenderly read this with my children and enjoy it. So, yeah, no matter what's said tonight, it's still a good story.
Well, I remember this was like a testimony builder for me that Jesus was the Christ back when I was a believer, because I had the idea if and maybe somebody told it to me, and it resonated with me, but like, if you're going to write a story of God, being among men, he would be born a king. But Jesus is born in the most humble circumstances imaginable. Therefore, this story could not possibly be made up.
No,
right. And who would that humble Jesus restore his gospel to? Like a learned person? No, a 14-year-old farm boy
with a third grade education.
Right?
Well, this is why, Luke and Matthew have different authorial ideas, right? So Matthew definitely made the whole story be about kings, because that's what Matthew's like. Yeah, of course, this guy is a king, and so he's prefigured by kings and wise men and everything like that are seeing all the signs in the heavens, the cosmos itself. And Luke's story is going to be the opposite of that, because Luke is a Hellenistic writer who is playing on all of these Greek ideals that still appeal to us, which are, like you're saying,
It's not totally the opposite, because Luke has this wonderful way of melding the two together, where half of the story is about his poor upbringings, his humble birth, and then half of the story is also making him divine. It's the humanization and also making him sacred, and because he's being worshipped and all the angels are showing up. So it has that wonderful juxtaposition of both. Like, Jesus is everything to you. He's approachable. He's just like you. He's a man, but also he is a God who's worshipped at his birth. It's both. It's great.
And that happens throughout Greek mythology, right? Where like somebody is unknown, and they're in this place that you wouldn't expect. So they're in this very common place, but there is all the divine thing that are happening around them that shows that they really are divine and are out of the ordinary in that space. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Is it?
I think it's you, Heather.
In that region,
Heather.
In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields. They were abiding in the fields, by the way, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. But the angel said unto them, do not be afraid. For see, I'm bringing you...
It's behold, isn't it?
For behold, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all people.
This was John Hamer, right? He was the angel that did this? I sang it.
I sang it, but it wasn't. It really did, it was kind of fell flat at the first time, and so it took a couple more songs to kind of get them in the mood. They're like, "What? Huh?"
But why would they change glad tidings to good news? I mean, just glad tidings seems more poetic.
It's so lovely.
All of these words that you guys are trying to put back in, we don't actually say behold. We don't say tidings. I mean, I'm trying to say.
Really? You haven't talked to me for long enough, John.
Yes, I haven't.
This is what happened. I'm bringing you glad tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord.
Unto us a child is born, right?
Okay.
Unto us a son is given.
This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger. And suddenly...
Swaddling clothes.
Swaddling
clothes. Right?
This is killing
bands
me.
Of cloth.
Bands of cloth. All right. And suddenly there was with the angel...
You guys are so unfamiliar with, like, the real text.
with an accurate translation.
Just because you were there.
No, but I'm just saying. I mean, it's just like this whole... I don't know. Okay.
All right, so were you guys taught that because the shepherds were out in the fields, that meant it had to be springtime because they'd be caring for the newborn lambs? And
this of course.
April 6th. That Jesus
it was April 6th.
April
6th, yeah.
The exact same time that the church was established.
Exactly.
1830, April 6th. You bet.
And then
Proof.
we switched it to December 25th for the Roman festival of...
There would be
Saturnalia?
snow if it was December.
Right.
Snow in Jerusalem, yes.
Oh, yes, back then.
People would be skiing down the slopes.
So that's why it's...
The next verse is
okay.
impossible not to sing, isn't it? Like, glory to God.
Glory to God. Glory to God. But here's what I love. My favorite is that the angel shows up and sends them on
earth, goodwill to man. Peace on earth, goodwill to man.
Aw.
He's among those whom he favors.
Right. Children of gay parents, just stop listening now.
Okay. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So I love that the angel sends them on this kind of scavenger hunt because he could totally tell them he's in, the stable behind Joe's inn, and everybody in Bethlehem, all the shepherds of Bethlehem would have known where this is. It's not that big of a town, right? But instead he's like, I'm going to give you 2 clues. Child wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. If you find a child in a manger, no swaddling clothes, it's not him, keep looking. It has to be both.
Those angels are tricksters.
Yes. And then they do, and they're like, oh, let's run down. I think we should do it. Okay, we got to read that part, though. Okay.
Go ahead.
Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors.
This is killing me, man.
And the rest of you, not so much.
Also, they're not singing. They're just praising God and saying. They just said it. Oh, there's no singing. Lame.
Right.
All right. There's no donkey. There's no singing. None of it happened. Okay. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us go down now to Bethlehem and see this thing which has taken place, which the Lord has made known unto us. So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them, so amazed that they never mentioned it again or wrote it down anywhere. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, as it had been told them.
So yeah. One of the things that in the Luke story that continuously happens is that whereas Matthew, like a lot of guys, is very Joseph focused, so Luke continuously has female characters, and Luke is interested in what Mary's doing. Luke is interested in prenatal stuff happening. Luke is interested in women's issues and problems and things like that, and widows. And so this is one of the reasons why some scholars have proposed that it's possible that Luke is one of these Christian widows who, is one of the early converts to Christianity, where older, wealthy women are actually supporting the early movement of the church. Wait.
So that the author of Luke was a woman?
Yeah,
could be.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
So the author of Luke could possibly, because the author of Luke is very interested in women and women's issues, as opposed to Matthew, who doesn't give a rat's ass.
Or Joseph Smith in the early days of the Book of Mormon.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and
No. Because this is back to seminary again, because this was written by Luke, the physician, and that's why he knew that at 6 months, a baby could leap in the womb. You did not hear that?
Yeah. That's a traditional idea but again, that has nothing to do with anything more than just a traditional association.
But I think
it's a physician that knew Paul or something like that. Yeah.
I think it's important to point out, just to make it plausible, is that Paul had no problem when he was setting up his Christian network as he was traveling, having women be in charge of the local community.
Right. And he referred to them as apostles. So in other words, women were able to be apostles in the early churches, or at least Paul's church, and Luke is associated with the Pauline branch of Christianity.
But how do we know that that wasn't one of the things that cunning people like polluted the scriptures with to try and confuse us in our days? Because it's obviously not consistent with the revealed current Word of God.
Do you all is your like TBM Whisperer always on?
Set on default?
It's like set on like antagonist over there. I mean, it's like that was
level 11.
Yeah, exactly. Turn that up to 11.
Cranked it up.
I don't even know what you guys are saying right now.
Spinal Tap. So we skipped the whole Annunciation to Mary. Speaking of these women, so we missed out on the whole famous Mormon doctrine that God is literally the semen donor of Jesus, right?
In Mormon tradition, yeah.
That's not Mormon doctrine as much as Brigham Young doctrine.
Brigham Young doctrine.
Yeah. We don't believe
it
that
still
anymore,
shows
us
up.
Mormons.
Isn't it in Talmage's Jesus?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It's not,
we don't talk about that.
No. We don't believe that now. Us.
Yep. I was reading a book of sermons published in the early 20th century of a pastor of the Toronto congregation who was just lambasted that idea, and was just like talking about Brigham Young saying,
Randy, would you correct him there? It's called lambasting.
Yeah, and that's my word. Thank you very much.
Yeah, come on.
Lambasted Brigham Young's idea that God the Father is doing the nasty with.
Well, it was still taught to me again in seminary, and not just that, but that Mary was a special case where she would not be sealed to Joseph in the coming world, but that she belonged to God and would be one of his wives.
But who is she the daughter of then?
Heaven
so in other
only
words,
knows.
is it like it's like God the Father is like actually brought her spirit from like some other
He paid a dowry.
gods? No, in other words, she's not actually his spirit child, or is he?
Well, I don't think that's implied. Who knows? It's all going very Greco-Roman now.
Own spirit child is my question.
Yeah, you're going to have to ask Brigham Young.
Yeah, but Adam and Eve, like who fathered all those kids? There was obviously divinely sanctioned incest back then. So come on, John.
Adam wasn't having sex with Eve's daughter.
You don't know that.
He was a polygamist. He had to be.
If it wasn't Adam, it was one of their brothers. I mean, come on.
Adam and Steve.
It doesn't matter if he's having sex with Steve. If he's having sex with he's having sex with Cain's daughter.
Yeah, that was just for fun. Okay, I'm going to read the next part.
Okay.
After 8 days had passed, it was time to circumcise the child.
You gotta do that.
He was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. One of the names given by the angel. When the time came for the purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male shall be designated as holy to the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord. A pair of turtle doves and
That's where that
in a pear
comes
tree.
from.
Yeah, right. Or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. This man was righteous and devout, looking forward to the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit rested on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. It's like a pre-patriarchal blessing kind of thing. It wasn't quite as official back then. It was kind of bastardized, Guided by the Spirit, Simeon came to the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what was customary under law, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Master, now you are dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to your people, Israel." And with that, he gave up the ghost and
just died right there.
Last words of
That's
Simeon.
the end of him.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, it's just like all those early members of the Restoration who were promised that they'd see the second coming.
Yeah, that's why.
Before they died.
That's why I inserted the patriarchal blessing thing.
And that worked exactly the same way for them.
Yes. Exactly. So in these apocryphal books of Jesus as a youth, is that possibly a source, or are there stories similar to this in those apocryphal stories of Jesus' youth?
This is earlier. So Luke is writing earlier before those stories. So those are essentially what happens is we have like the Markan account, which is way more compact. It doesn't include all of this early childhood stuff or all these signs and of the later incredibleness of Jesus. But then in Matthew and Luke, we have these additional accounts that they add into it, and then people just continuously build on that. So the stories get more and more incredible as additional writers take up the topic,
as legends usually do.
Yeah, as legends do. And what people aren't aware is that all of those they're all part of the same genre, but at a certain point the canonical councils cut them off and said, okay, but these aren't going to be included because we don't believe these.
So here's what I'm hoping, because we watched Zoolander last night as a family. So I'm hoping that in Zoolander 2, they elaborate upon the story and talk about the virgin birth, and that there was some kind of like a Simeon who saw the young, Zoolander? Derek. Yeah, Derek. Yeah, right. And died right before. I saw him.
They saw Blue Magnum, and they were overcome.
Before there was Magnum. Right.
No, it was Blue Steel and Magnum. That's what it was.
Yeah, and Magnum.
What was the title?
I'm hoping.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to...
I've got fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
The birth of Hansel.
Right.
Oh, he's so dreamy.
He's so hot right now.
All right, can I finish this out?
Yep.
And the child's father and mother, right? And the child's father and mother were amazed at what was being said about him. Then Simeon's still alive. Then Simeon blessed them and said to his mother Mary, "This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." There was also a prophet, Anna. Gosh, there's a lot of women. There's too many women.
Every single time in Luke. So when we read Luke and Acts is just the second part of the Luke story. There's almost always a woman that is paired with the man. So in other words, if Simeon, the male prophet, is going to do something, then Anna does the same thing. If Paul is the first person that baptizes a Gentile male in Europe, then Peter will do a Gentile female. So there's always Luke loves that kind of male-female symmetry. So.
And this is actually one of the ways the biblical apologists explain the divergent genealogies for Christ in Luke and Matthew, because they say the one in Luke then is probably Mary's genealogy, when she was also of the house of David, which is opposite of what the text says. The text says Joseph, gives his name, but this is like the best argument the biblical apologists can come up with, is that Luke loved women. He probably meant to write Mary and wrote Joseph by mistake.
Doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah,
that's pretty good for an apologist. Argument. Yeah. So, and she's also called a prophet. So there was also a prophet, Anna Monson, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age, having lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage. Then as a widow to the age of 84, she never left the temple, but worshipped there with fasting and prayer night and day. At that moment she came and began to praise God and to speak about the child to all who were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. When they had finished everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. The child grew, and this is like the ... Okay,
right.
now he's grown.
Montage.
Yes. Montage, yes. With the background music from Survivor. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. I tell you what, man, just that line alone has piqued the imagination of so many Christians, of like filling in that gap. Like what... And I probably, is the reason why all those apocryphal crazy stories arose.
Right.
Because Luke gives you nothing,
Well, Luke includes more than anybody else because Luke then has the Jesus in the temple that comes next, right?
Oh, is that in Luke? Okay.
Yeah.
And that's also the last appearance of Joseph, right? And as the father.
Right. Yeah. So Joseph,
and he disappears.
Pretty well gone too. So yeah. The one nice thing, the reason why we read, even though this isn't often read in your Christmas pageant, the circumcision part of Jesus.
Well, that's because it's like in January now. It's not Christmas anymore.
Right. Well, but those wise men are not getting there, and they're not coming to the stable, right? So sometimes the way they tell that story, that's later, right?
Plus, that would be a really weird-looking nativity, the circumcision of Jesus.
His bris.
His foreskin was probably resurrected, and it grew back.
That's a good
After
question.
3 days, the foreskin was there again. It was a miracle, but they didn't include that in the...
Right.
Why haven't I ever heard that before? I've heard about ear piercings and tattoos, but never about the foreskin. Is that resurrected or not?
Are resurrected penises circumcised, or are they turtlenecks?
Oh, that's too funny.
Do they have a personality or not? That's the Elaine Bennis.
Yes. I just watched that with Jake.
And you remember it. Awesome.
Yes. Okay. So the reason we don't read it, John, is because people might look to the next verse and see someone called Anna was a prophet and she was a woman.
Right, exactly. And that's why Luke put that in there. So in other words, Luke is busily fighting with people like the pseudo-Paul that wrote the Timothy epistles were saying that I command
women.
a woman should not speak in church. But what Luke is saying is, hey, look, here's a woman. The woman is a prophet, and she is speaking in the temple itself. And she is one of the people that is actually declaring that Jesus is the Messiah. So Luke is actually, presenting a massive counter precedent to the people who are dominionists, who are trying to make women, be inferior, and those contradictory opinions and those contradictory ideas are existing in the New Testament itself.
And not that you needed a precedent, because you have Deborah from the prophet of the Old Testament and various others as well.
Sure.
But this is going into the Christian scriptures because it's the contemporary argument.
Yeah. So you have, like you say, there are Old Testament prophetesses or female prophets, and same thing in the New Testament too.
All right.
I'm surprised you included John, because it's really not a Christmas thing in here. Like he's like, this is the Jesus Christ superstar gospel, and he's God right from the beginning. Unlike Mark, where he's the suffering secret prophet, John, he is God from the beginning, and he tells everybody.
Right. And so I guess the reason why I like okay, so in terms of our readings here, I included the portion. So John is writing this gospel. We don't know what the author's name is, but anyway, attributed to John, that is almost has nothing to do with history, but it is the farthest away from Mark, and now John is just taking this theological idea of Jesus as God and then reinterpreting it back into how that God would have lived a life. And so instead of any of these kind of issues that are happening, that either kings are seeing that Jesus must have been a king that was born, in Matthew, or shepherds, or any other kind of Hellenistic symbols and everything like that. In John, it's just like, this is God, right from the start, So the difference is between, again, the historical Jesus, the Jesus Christs of Scripture, which are actually quite different from each other, because each one of these authors has a very different impression of what Jesus Christ even is. And then finally, the Christ of theology, which John is primarily speaking to. So.
Do you have dates? I should have asked this earlier. I thought it, but do you have dates for the Mark, or even the Q, the Mark, the Matthew, the Luke, the John, when they were written?
Just educated guesses.
Mark is 66. Matthew and Luke are placed in the 80s and 90s.
And that's because
John is over 100.
I was going to say, the reason why they know...
Josephus is 94. which is not a gospel. It's just the record of the Jewish people.
That's actual history. But don't Matthew and Luke have some kind of reference to the temple being destroyed, and that's why they think it definitely happened after 70 AD?
Right, yeah, and Luke and Mark even might.
Yeah.
So Mark may well be Mark is most likely written in a time period when the temple's already been destroyed, but before the end of the whole
the siege ended.
Yeah, and that's why he's got this kind of very particular apocalyptic view that he thinks that the end of the world is happening because the war is maybe ongoing, and so as a result of Mark's kind of almost very bizarre view as far as all other Christians were concerned, that's one of the reasons why Luke and Matthew felt the serious need to revise, Mark's texts. So Mark also may have done this thing where, so Mark has this very strange thing. Not only is there no nativity and no Christmas story at the beginning, but there's actually no
Ascension.
Yeah, no resurrection, all this kind of thing at the end. So almost all there's a little tiny ending that is in our Bibles usually, but it's an appendix that got added on because people hated the end of Mark's gospel, which is more or less that Jesus was gone, and the angels, he more or less told the women that saw that, don't tell anybody, because this is all, it's all secret and everything like that. And so Mark apparently felt that there was going to be a second coming of Jesus that would have that there hadn't been any second coming in the meantime. So whereas the Gospels later kind of write where Jesus is kind of appearing to people, like shortly after his death, that doesn't happen in Mark. And so instead, Mark takes those kind of stories, where you have the kind of resurrected Jesus that is appearing as a spirit in glory and all those kind of things. And Mark takes those stories and retrojects them earlier into the narrative. And so Mark takes like a story of the people seeing, like Peter, James, and John, seeing the resurrected Jesus, because he doesn't believe that Jesus has come back yet. He takes that story and he puts it back and he creates the story of the Mount of Transfiguration. Or he takes the story of a dead Jesus who's already resurrected, that's walking around on the water in the Sea of Galilee, and he retrojects that and brings it back as if that happened while Jesus was alive. And so Mark completely makes this kind of crazy miracle thing by taking, because he doesn't believe that there's a resurrected Jesus yet, that he thinks that the resurrected Jesus is about to come. And all the other people are like, what are you talking about? we've already, people already said they saw him and stuff like that. So that's why Matthew and Luke change it, and then people write different endings to Mark that get attached to Mark.
Well,
I think we should cover that in more depth in April.
And our Easter episode.
Yeah, Easter. Yeah, we'll talk about Easter. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that Mark must have had that document must have had some clout, because Luke and Matthew clearly don't like Mark, but they don't trash it and write their own fucking story. They take Mark and they embellish on it.
Yeah.
Whereas the community of John, whether they were just isolated, arrogant, or whatever it was.
Yeah,
they looked at what existed, or they didn't take anything from what existed, and they just wrote a whole new story.
Yeah, right.
It's a different set of stories. Yeah,
yeah. They may have been aware of it. If they were, they totally rejected it.
Totally,
we don't. But it's hard to know. And they were using their own source material. But it may be that they were writing theirs in reaction to the fact that these Markan stories were out there, and they hated it.
Yeah, but
I love how you keep saying Markan.
Well, because
that's really, really cool.
They're communities. The Mark community,
Markan.
the Luke, the Matthew.
Markan.
The Yohanan.
Okay.
Markan, Lucan. So we're getting close to 1 a.m. and
all right.
So
whose fault is that, Glenn? Really? Whose fault is that?
I know. My MacBook. We started an hour later because of my MacBook. Okay, so let's go. We've got probably 3 readings on John.
Okay.
Read them.
That's it.
Glenn's.
Is it me? No, I think it's Heather.
Heather.
In the beginning was the Word. It's for Heather.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being.
Jesus.
What has come into being in him was life. and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it.
And this is why we have Christmas lights at Christmas.
Yes.
Finish
Do I
it.
continue?
Finish it.
Sure.
He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him.
Never.
But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God,
That's you guys.
who were
That's
born
everyone who believes on this.
not of blood,
Special
or of the
people.
will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us.
There's Christmas.
And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God.
Until Joseph Smith in the
Insert.
Sacred Grove.
That's why
Until then.
that's why I actually included it up to this point.
Or
Like,
Stephen.
When Stephen was stoned, yeah.
It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known.
There you go. So, in other words, what John has here is we've lost any semblance of trying to write a history, which was what.
So you're saying we're not even pretending anymore?
Yeah, it's a theology.
Yeah, and so this is entirely a theology, right? So now John is trying to write about Christ, the theological idea, as opposed to Jesus Christ as
The dude from Nazareth.
Yeah, which
A Nazarene.
Which, by the way, if you guys go to Facebook, and I don't know, do the trending stories on the Facebook sidebar, are those tailored towards like individual taste? Because mine shows that there was some scientist who recreated the actual face of Jesus scientifically, and it doesn't look anything like these medieval paintings.
I've
Yeah,
seen that from
that's
years
Is that
ago,
on your
yes.
Facebook?
Yeah, that's the.
feed?
it
that's,
is on my Facebook.
That's the Jufro Jesus with the dark
Right.
skin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Could have
that's
been like in
racist to
Starsky and
Jews.
Hutch.
Right.
Starsky and Hutch. That was.
But we don't know. I would even say though that we don't even know that whether or not he's got a beard like that. because it's a
He doesn't have
Hellenistic
blue
time
eyes
period.
and Nordic features.
No, he doesn't have
And auburn
eyes and
hair,
Nordic
yeah.
features. In other words, these horrible paintings that they made in the Romantic era, we should get rid of.
He probably looked exactly like Donald Trump.
He's 30. Donald Trump is we're younger. Donald Trump is
You're as cutting as a cactus. You're as slippery as an eel.
It's just to make you think about and Cheetos.
You're a bad banana with a greasy black peel. You're a monster, Mr. Grinch.
Ho, ho, ho. This is Santa Claus, and I like to stroke the fur on my reindeer while listening to Infants on Thrones. You can comment on this episode on the website at infantsonthrones.com, and if you really like what you hear, and if you want to stay off the naughty list, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Anyone for a nice tall glass of milk and some homemade cookies?
Given the choice between the two of you, I'd take the seasick crocodile. Take it, Mr. Grinch.
Some of the Old Testament ones to make a Christmas Advent calendar for my kids, and we would read those scriptures, every day leading up. But so we'd read John 1 on Christmas morning, which is always such a bummer because nobody wants to stop and read the scriptures when the house is full of toys and food. but and make them suffer through John. But my favorite one was day 24, which is Psalm 130, which is, I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. My soul waiteth for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. Yea, I say, more than they that watch for the morning. Oh, I love Christmas. I can't wait.
See, and I'm just excited for Star Wars to come out. I can't wait. That's going to be awesome. Saturday.
Oh.
6 days. Like, I wanted to create a Star Wars Awakenings advent calendar.
It's
Christmas.
It's Friday, right?
Well, yeah, but my tickets are for Saturday.
Oh,
that's what
I got it. Yeah,
something to look forward to.
Like another virgin birth. Anakin.
Oh, man.
Right?
Stop talking about prequels.
My favorite line in the trailer is Han Solo turning to her, I don't know, this woman's, and saying, it's true.
All true.
All true.
All of it. Every single legend you've ever heard, every detail is absolutely true.
Don't ruin it for me, Randy.
That was such a stupid line.
Really, I felt the spirit. I loved it.
Right. The connection is Yoda, Spencer W. Kimball.
Oh, my.
The Force is the priesthood.
Like
George Lucas knew what he was talking about. He was tapping into truth and he didn't even know it.
John Hamer is a Star Trek fan.
Oh, does that mean you hate Star Wars?
Pretty much.
So obviously I'm of the age...
Obviously.
where I was 7 when Star Wars came out, and so therefore it was the biggest deal in all of the universe.
Right.
And went through and had...
or at least the galaxy.
It was the biggest deal in the universe. The whole universe.
Superlatives.
The toys, man. The toys were
I had
so
all the
cool.
toys. I had the AT-ATs, like in...
and the Hoth thing where they had the little...
You were
the little
rich
pegs
fuck.
that would fit into the holes on the feet of the action figures.
I had a paper route, so of course I had an AT-AT and everything.
A paper route.
Yeah, I'm old.
Well, you're 3 years older than me, but when we go to Toys R Us, I would look at the AT-ATs just with such longing. Like it was something that was so far away from my reach, but was so beautiful. I was lucky to get 3 Star Wars figures for Christmas. We were so fucking poor.
Did they make Jesus action figures in Constantine times?
Yes.
Was the Jesus story is what we just read?
Yes.
Was that
was
the Star
the
Wars
toy.
of its age?
Yes, absolutely. It was
that was the Star Wars
Cabbage
of its age.
Dolls
The Teddy Ruxpin
of the Theodosian era.
Nice. See, I just wanted to tie it all back in as we end.
We're all 6 years. There's only a 6-year range in all of 4 of our ages, so we're pretty much from the same generation.
All born
I
in the
don't
70s.
appreciate you telling the listeners how old I am, Randy.
This is all bullshit crap that's going to be lopped off at the end.
It better be, because I'm 27.
Did we have an end yet, or did I just hijack it?
You pretty much hijacked it with your Trump.
Profound.
Trump. I hijacked
Anything
it.
profound
It
to
was
say
the
about
Trump
John?
moment.
We just echo, and it kind of echoes off. Trump, Donald Trump.
Talk about the war on Christmas.
Amidala.
The war on Christmas, yes.
Oh my
We
god!
must talk about the war on Christmas.
This is my favorite time of year. This is when I pull out This is the only time I pull out a gun to enact my war on Christmas.
Star War on Christmas.
Oh, no. We're back to Star Wars.
I should not have had that second Moscow Mule. It just ruined everything.
With moldy purple spots.
It's so sad that
Overflowing with the most disgraceful assortment of deplorable rubbish imaginable. Mangled up and tangled up. Mr. Cred.
Thank you for listening to Infants on infants on thrones.